Audio. Welcome. Is this audio on? Yeah. Yes. No. Are you awake?
Yeah.
Awake? So far, nobody's nodded.
Nobody's awake.
I'm Neil Gershenfeld. I'm going to scroll this browser. I'm going to start by explaining what this is. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here. This is a remarkable room full of people. I'd like to start by noting I'm the least qualified person to be here. I don't really belong here, but this is a result of a really unusual collaboration. I run the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT that's hosting this event that's done things like the first quantum computer or part of the first synthetic life. And my background's in physics, and there was a period where I was working on device physics and ran into Diana, and Diana approached me about device physics for animal interfaces. And so we started collaborating on that. And then I spun off a giant network of now a few thousand labs around the world, and so ran a video head-end to do giant collaborative multi-site video collaboration. And ran into Peter, and he told me a story about playing music with great apes, and like, could we do something about it? And then I ran into Vint, where he and I were at a program on the future of the internet, and just mentioned this in passing, and then Vint mentioned in passing, he was on the board of the Gabriel Foundation at the time, I believe, and that tumbled through a couple steps into, I think, 3 of us were going to be at TED anyway, and so I proposed to TED we do a meeting and a talk, and then Vint joined, and so we did a TED talk on interspecies communication. And it very much kind of backed into that random path. Since then, we've done some test beds. The project has been percolating. For none of us, it's quite, well, I guess mostly for Diana, but for the rest of us, it's not our day job. But it's been this really unusual, interesting collaboration. And after a few years of percolation, we felt like it was time to follow up, to pull a community together. And so we planned an event of community working on all sides of interspecies communication. And for those of you who don't know, this is what's beyond a dream team. This is just about everybody still living who's done just about anything important in this field. It's just an amazing response. We tread very lightly on announcing this. Tomorrow there's a Future of the Internet 50th event that has hundreds of people. We tread very lightly on announcing this because this room would easily be swamped because of any one of these people on stage, but this is a real working meeting, and I'll tell you more about that. I ran into Vint, where he and I were at a program on the future of the internet, and just mentioned this in passing, and then Vint mentioned in passing, he was on the board of the Gabriel Foundation at the time, I believe, and that tumbled through a couple steps into, I think, 3 of us were going to be at TED anyway, and so I proposed to TED we do a meeting and a talk, and then Vint joined, and so we did a TED talk on interspecies communication. And it very much kind of backed into that random path. Since then, we've done some test beds. The project has been percolating. For none of us, it's quite, well, I guess mostly for Diana, but for the rest of us, it's not our day job. But it's been this really unusual, interesting collaboration. And after a few years of percolation, we felt like it was time to follow up, to pull a community together. And so we planned an event of the community working on all sides of interspecies communication. And for those of you who don't know, this is what's beyond a dream team. This is just about everybody still living who's done just about anything important in this field. It's just an amazing response. We tread very lightly on announcing this. Tomorrow there's a Future of the Internet 50th event that has hundreds of people. We tread very lightly on announcing this because this room would easily be swamped because of any one of these people on stage, but this is a real working meeting, and I'll tell you more about that. CBA Center for Bits and Atoms, historically has done a series of one-off topical events that have seeded communities. So years ago we did one at the early days of what became Internet of Things, and we did one on what became a science of fabrication, and we did one on science in Hollywood that became the National Office for Science in Hollywood. And so CBA will never host this again, but the goal, like those other ones, is to really seed a process and a community, and for this to live on far beyond this day. So we've organized the day in 4 groups, only vaguely thematically. It's really just with this more than dream team dividing them in 4 groups. Each is going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then the rest of the time is discussion, moderated by each of us. The discussion was sprinkled between the talks at the end of the talks. The way we're going to do Q&A is this, and this is a detail you need to remember. If you go to Slido, sli.do, and the event code for today is 7414. And so you go to Slido and 7414, and then you'll join. And here, we can have a prize for the first person to do this. Peter on your answering machine. And so your questions will be streaming through here. And just as you're speaking, people on stage will see commentary and questions, and that's how we'll be handling the Q&A. So just, Hyatt Works. But we don't know who Hyatt Works is. If you want, you can identify who you are. And so we'll be seeing those streaming through. And let's see, I just noticed as you're doing that, they're not scrolling here. James, can you come look at the computer doing the Q&A app, and it's not scrolling as they're asking. And so it's under the cover, so figure out how to make it scroll. Thanks. So that's Q&A, lunch, and then throughout the day there's a number of remarkable people who we didn't have room to put on the program or who didn't want to be formally on the program but have contributed profoundly. The last half hour are lightning talks, which is just open mic. Just anybody can come up based on what's gone through the day and for anything you want to contribute or that we missed for the last half hour. And then there's reception. I'll introduce Jeremy in a minute, but one of the nice exercises, which hadn't come up before an event here, is all of the lunch and reception catering is vegan for people who care. So today is going to be this rapid fire tour of what's happening past, present, future about interspecies communication. Then all of this is really just a warm-up. Tomorrow from 9 to 12, in the lecture hall over there, is a workshop. And we let a number of you know this isn't advertised publicly, but the workshop is for what comes next. Today is what is and what could be. Tomorrow's workshop is now filling in, does this need 501c3? Does this need donors to give lots of money? Does it need a platform to support interoperability? So tomorrow is a real working workshop, and the workshop will be planned in the workshop. And so you're invited to the workshop, but you need to know the caution is if you come to the workshop, you'll have work. That there are no spectators at the workshop. The workshop, everybody at the workshop leaves with an assignment. Okay? The workshop is, if you go through that wall and then the wall behind that wall, you'll come to a lecture hall, and then a workshop will be in there. Okay? And so that's what today is about. The first block we're going to hear from 4 remarkable people, and then we'll start the cycle of this. And I'd like to start by thanking Google, which helps support the event through Vint, the Coller Foundation, which helps support this event through Jeremy and Rosie, and Kara, who's probably running around somewhere and can't be seen, for making this possible. And with that, let's see, I forget the order we had said. Okay, so Peter first. Okay. And I will get this ready for you. Do you want me to just play it?
Okay. Well, it's very exciting to be here today, to see so many of these people that I've been reading and learning about actually in the same room together. I sort of fell into this by chance. I was fascinated by some of the reports of the work Sue Savage-Rumbaugh and Annie Patterson were doing with language and primates, and I just thought, okay, well, I'm going to call up. So I did a cold call to Sue and said, have you thought about experimenting a little bit with music, and could I be someone to try it? And she said, come on down. So I went a few times, and also got to visit Penny and Coco, and the experience just blew me away and transformed my attitude to a lot of things. So probably a lot of people will have seen this, but excuse me for that. I'm just going to play it one more time because it was the moment that changed me. Is that just a bit? It's just like this on stage, by the way. Someone has to come and rescue me regularly. Great.
Can you play a grooming song?
That's Sue. This is Pamela.
I want to hear a grooming song. Play a real quiet grooming song.
Sue worked out that they were going to respond much more if they chose the subject for the song. I'm sitting next door on a keyboard. Yeah, we'd asked Pamela to play with one finger. She chose 2 fingers. But she was being very thoughtful. There were particular notes that she was really drawn to. Where we really connected. Yeah, she finds the octave.
You did good. That was very good.
As she pressed the button for good. Okay, sorry.
Just
Yeah.
see, how much time had she had with the keyboard before that?
I went down 4 times. I think this is probably the first or second time. Do you remember, Sue? I can't remember which time it was.
She has no musicians really, so you can, so we have a little keyboard and she could fit on it, but
Yeah.
nobody told play because until Peter. And Peter told me that others would not be able to do what he did. We tried afterward and they weren't.
Well, I didn't say others won't be able to do that, but I thought it was just, I've worked a lot with musicians from different cultures, and part of what you learn is to listen and to try and make space for things to happen. And so I think of it, what I was saying was I felt that approach would be necessary. But anyway, it blew me away, and then watching the way that they were using symbols, communicating, and then with Penny and Coco seeing how the sign language was used and how the sort of poetry came out of the combination of words. It led me to think that you'd have to be deaf, blind, and very dumb not to notice language being used. And so I got very excited about that and started trying to connect with other people. And it's an intermittent stops and starts type project, but it really is wonderful now to be here and also to have the support that we have. But I think my experience has been that when swimming in the right direction, things seem to synchronize and happen. So I took, just this weekend, I arrived a little early because I was in Toronto. And on Friday, I met with some friends of ours, and Brian Goldberg, who'd done a project at Reiss, which is, I think, a tikkun olam, a Kabbalistic term which I didn't know of, but which I think vaguely means repair to the world. We spent some time riffing on that. And Joey I met on Saturday morning, and he was talking too about raising consciousness on Mother Nature. And Itai was telling me too about times when he was working with indigenous peoples, and they were telling him how the people of the caves or the forest, or which of the apes, had led the humans led us to plants that were going to save them in certain situations. Anyway, all these stories started adding up, and it seemed to be part of a whole. And clearly, there was a time when we didn't think we were separate from the planet that gave us birth, when we thought we were part of it, when we were connecting. But when we're seeing temperatures rising, kids taking time out of school for Extinction Rebellion, we turned David Attenborough into a prophet of doom. There are things that need to be addressed, and that perhaps there's a role for re-examining how we relate to the other intelligent species that we share the planet with. And this has obviously been your life's work, and I'm just a tourist here, but it's very inspiring, and I think it's part of the solution, so thank you.
Good morning. So, as to follow what Peter's saying, for so long we've thought of ourselves as being at the pinnacle of this tree, with all these other species below us somehow. For so long we've thought about ourselves as being the only thinking species. And it's really reflected how we treat others that we share this planet with. What's really interesting about this is that from ancient times on, we've connected a ratio speech with ratio thinking. We can express our feelings, we can express our thoughts, we can express our minds in speech that others understand. But because we never understood the languages, the communication systems, the gestures, the electric signals of other animals and how they express those things, we thought those animals were devoid of thought. And it's been such a fascinating time to be a scientist. I'm a marine mammal scientist and a cognitive psychologist. I study both marine mammals and how they think, and a little bit about how elephants think. And it's been a great time because now we have more technology, and also our minds are thinking different ways about looking for intelligence, looking for evidence of thinking in other species. There's this ancient myth about King Solomon. It's a biblical story that King Solomon had a magic ring that allowed him to communicate with other animals. And much later, an ethologist, Konrad Lorenz, who is, again, one of the fathers of ethology, how we study animals in their natural world, said maybe King Solomon didn't really have a magic ring. Maybe what he had was the power of observation. That, as Peter mentioned, he made the space to see and hear what other animals were doing. And I think now many of us in this room have pioneered these kinds of studies to make the space, watch animals, listen to animals, and see what they're doing. Charles Darwin not only put forth the idea of a physical continuity, but an emotional continuity and a cognitive continuity between us and the rest of the animal world. But his voice and what he was saying in those domains didn't take off like they did in terms of physical evolution. Much later, others, including Donald Griffin, who's no longer with us, put forth this idea that it is a scientific question to ask about the minds of animals, how they communicate, do they have emotions, can they experience pain and suffering? And Donald Griffin wrote a little book that made a huge impression. It was called The Question of Animal Awareness, and it really kicked off this field of cognitive ethology that many of us are enjoying and participating now. When we think about these others, I wish we had other animals in this room to share what their perceptions are, and we're just kind of messengers, we're just reporters of what we've been learning. But we're going to hear today about studies that have been done with the great apes, with other species that are not primate species. I study elephants. We're not going to have, I think we're having one talk about elephants today. African gray parrots. We used to think they were bird brains. That perspective has changed. The octopus, cephalopods, and my own work is with dolphins, and they're about as alien as you can get, and I've spent 40 years exploring the mind and behavior of these animals and tried to find ways of bringing that to other people. So here's a dolphin, little Bailey, she's at the National Aquarium, looking through a two-way glass, or a one-way glass, watching herself playfully spin. This is a dolphin, has a mind. She shows self-awareness, as do other dolphins, and by the way, elephants, as well as chimpanzees, magpies, and us humans. And many years ago, I did a study asking what would happen if we gave these big brains a voice. So we designed, in similar ways that they worked with great apes, an underwater keyboard for dolphins. And I'm not going to really speak today. I'm going to have my colleague, Marcelo Magnasco, who's here, talk about some of our current work. But just using a very simple keyboard that was interfaced with an old Apple II computer, that we did this in the 80s and 90s, we found that dolphins, if you give them choice and control, again, they show you their voice. And what we found was they hit a key, they could hear a whistle for a different, and get a different object, and they quickly imitated those sounds. Here's the computer keyboard version of Ring, the dolphin's beautiful imitation, and they started to associate those sounds with those objects when they had choice and control. What was fascinating about it is it was very similar to what we see in the early stages of child language acquisition. But we were exquisitely limited in our technology at the time. So today we've designed an interactive optical touchscreen for dolphins, and it's being used right now at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. We call it the D-pad, and later again today, Marcelo Magnasco is going to talk about the system that we're using and how hopefully it will provide a window into the mind of animals. With that, I just want to say a few last things, that I think that these studies and showing reflections of animal minds and giving them voice is one of our strongest conservation and welfare tools. This way we can share those voices that can't speak for themselves. So I'm extremely excited about this meeting today. I thank my colleagues in advance for doing this and our supporters, and I'm really looking forward to this being really kicking off more interest and excitement and continued research in this area. Thank you.
Let me ask people in the next session, go to the back. So Irene, Joseph, Sue, Con, Francine, Noot, go to the back and get a wireless lab to be ready. So Vint.
Well, first of all, welcome. welcome. This is just a fantastic place to have a meeting like this, and it's particularly interesting for me. I know almost nothing about animal communication except for when I play with my dog. On the other hand, I'm expecting to learn a great deal from the discussions that we have today. The internet and the interspecies internet is kind of incidental. It's just a mechanism for drawing two species together that might not otherwise be co-located. Otherwise, it's not doing very much except transporting information back and forth, unless, of course, we decide to intervene and do something to process the communication on one end before it gets to the other end. And that might imply that we've learned something about the substance of the communication from one species and how to adapt it to another. So it would be very interesting to see whether that turns out to be an important component in a successful enterprise. The thing that I believe is the most persuasive for me is observing intentional actions by species other than humans. Watching dogs play, for example, and like the one where you throw the ball and the dog brings the ball back, and then you reach down to get it, and the dog snatches the ball and runs away with it. Said, "Aha, I think you didn't get it." It's amazing. I mean, I think humor is a very sophisticated notion, and I believe that there's strong evidence that animals other than humans have this capacity for fun and humor, and they also have the capacity for problem solving. And I think that's another element of depth of understanding, watching an animal formulate a model of how to solve a problem. Watching birds figure out how to poke a stick through a hole in order to get a peanut out of a glass cylinder to get that reward is actually pretty fascinating. And then you discover that other birds watching this will imitate that solution. So I think that this collective effort today should underscore and I hope articulate how important it is to recognize that non-humans are thinking beings and that we should treat them that way.
I probably don't have to say Vint is credited with inventing the internet, but is really the face of the internet. So we're delighted to have the internet attending. And then Jeremy. Okay.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to be here. But I just wanted to say about Jeremy, because he's a very generous man and he's been supporting another project with the others.org. But he told me about two ideas that he was working on. One is to be a key person in ending factory farming. And the second was to apply leverage from pension funds. Now, pension was one of the most boring topics for me. I couldn't think I would ever be interested. But the amount of pension funds that he now has on his side and trying to engage them to make the world a better place has totally transformed that view. This is Jeremy Coller.
13.2 trillion. So in a way, I'm apologising for being up here because I'm just super interested in what this can do. And Neil said, why don't I tell you just a little bit about how I got interested. And he asked me to just mention a story we talked about last night, which is I died 6 years ago. And I got better. And by that, a friend of mine asked if he could write my obituary, and I said, "What the fuck are you talking about?" But I say yes, and so I said, "I want to live happy to 100. I don't want anyone else to read it, and I've got 4 ingredients to happy to 100: purpose, love, health, and gratitude." And so he wrote it. We went skiing, and he said, "I've done it. You die tomorrow." He said, "You created an industry. I'm a pension. I'm an asset manager, investment. You've created an industry, you're very rich, and you're a total bore." That was the obituary. He said, "I have another one, you're 98 years old, and this one's quite exciting. Actually, he said, you're amazing. This is like 40 years from being a bore." And he said that I changed pension policy in Africa, and that a business school named after me, and blah, 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 and the business was great. sitting there and I'm 98 years old and I'm thinking to myself, honestly, I would much prefer to save authentically a few cows from a concentration camp than do these other things. And because I became vegetarian at 12. And so, how do you end factory farming? He wrote that I'm the person that ends factory farming, which I laughed at completely. But then you have to play with the cards that you've been dealt. And I don't know here, people who've seen Blackfish, the film. Has everyone seen it? And the Blackfish is about the dolphins at SeaWorld, and it's an animal rights movie in a way, done by the trainers. But if you look at it through the lens of the pension funds or investors, you see that a $100,000 film, it was $110,000 in total, created over 1.5 billion of shareholder value destruction. It's a different lens to look at it through. And so, pension plans today are saying, what's the point of having a pension in 30 years if the temperature is 220 degrees? They're saying if we're going to build a textile factory in Bangladesh or somewhere, we want to make sure there are fire exits and foundations because it's good business. This is a slightly different talk than going to be here, but giving an idea of how it came to it. And so we created FAIR, which has over 13 trillion of investors in just 3.5 years. It's been an amazing organisation. And basically, it's all about materiality. There is no morality in this. So I have my agenda. I'm happen to be vegetarian, but that's just personal. It's got nothing to do. Factory farms, I think we can all agree, we tend to all agree, are not good things for other animals. And so it has a simple message to food and big ag, which is we own you. And that, it's been mind-blowing to me that the food system needs fixing fast, as factory farming is truly a threat to the prosperity and safety of the world. So, it's the #1 user of antibiotics worldwide. 80% of antibiotics in the US are used on factory farms. #1 cause of Amazonian deforestation. I mean, Peter, you were talking about deforestation and everything. 91% of Amazonian deforestation is a result of factory farming because we need to feed 70 billion animals to feed 7 billion humans. So most of soy, 85% of soya is used on these factory farms. And also in the last 4 years, we brought a lot of these NGOs, that are animal welfare NGOs, into the mainstream by changing the conversation. And as a consumer or NGO, you can ask a food company to change. But as an investor and their owner, it's a different conversation. You can tell them to change. I mean, you can all influence the endowment here, the pension funds you have. It's the largest pool of capital in the world now, investable capital, which is owned by, crazily, it is the democratization, Vincent and I were talking just before, it is the democratization of wealth because it is the citizens' capital that is now owning all these businesses from McDonald's to Tyson's, etc. So, as a little group 3 years ago, we forced 20 mega food companies like McDonald's and KFC to commit to when they're phasing out the routine use of antibiotics. 80% of antibiotics are used from factory farms. To tackle climate, we've demanded that giant supermarket chains like Walmart and Tesco have a sustainable protein engagement with them, so that they basically put more plant protein on the meat aisle. And so, that's just beginning. Wall Street is now driving the transformation, as well as social media and government and law. So my simple message would be that investment is a very powerful weapon, and investors killed coal, and cows are the new coal, as it were. But the other things we're doing is we're launching an exhibition, which this might be very interesting for, on basically food 1950 to 2050. So, you know, how factory farms started to the choices we have for the future. And we're doing the first international animal law conference with Harvard, Cambridge, Tel Aviv University, and a number of politicians from around the world who can plagiarize each other's laws. And we started this in India, where the National Congress Party spokesman, when he heard this little pitch, said, he's a Jain, so he needs to do something. So we helped him write, Rosie helped a lot actually, helped a lot in writing legislation that he's putting through as a private member's bill that can just be copied, you know, from livestock travel to antibiotics and labeling and things like that. And so, you know, language, to me, when Peter first mentioned this, is it 6 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that, just piqued my interest because, you know, if I can have a chat with a cow, maybe I might have more compassion for it. And which is not quite true because humans have a lot of discussions